we started with the opportunities and pitfalls. So this is kind of an example flow for starting with OKRs, and this is what we started with when we started working with the unit in Yle. So of course, it's good to have objectives for your OKR initiative or experiment. What are you trying to achieve with the OKRs? Start with that. But then you need to have, because it's based on the company vision, company strategy. So probably you need to start clarifying that next, and thinking about how to communicate it, and also how to discuss with people in different units and different teams about it, so that you can have a genuine discussion. Then I think it's said a couple of times, it's good to start small, experimenting with OKRs, start small. So I would suggest freedom and volunteering, like recruiting pilot teams, setting, communicating the objectives for the OKR experiment, and recruiting pilot teams based on volunteers. And then doing some training, growing the baseline skills, understanding. I think a couple of the groups from the earlier exercise said that this setting goals or objectives, outcome-based objectives, it's quite difficult. So in the first trainings, you might not aim for that. Maybe you introduce that and lower bar some, but you get some idea and some training of what's the idea behind OKRs or this kind of goal setting. Then start doing, stop thinking, start doing, create first company OKRs, and then first team OKRs, and then there's a discussion between those. So you have first draft of company OKRs, and then the team OKRs, or even some multiple levels. So you are doing it top down, starting with the company and ending up with the units and then the teams. And you're also doing it bottom up. You're starting with the teams, defining their OKR drafts, and then discussing in the middle, and then getting each party from the top getting feedback and the bottom getting feedback and aligning. And so in my kind of view, there's not a straightforward process of doing that. It's going to be messy, and you have to go top down and bottom up at the same time, and use some time to discuss and align and meet in the middle and collide and so on. So it's not clear cut, like do it like this or do it like that. So it's both bottom up, both top down. And then of course the OKRs are not the whole beef. The routines are part of it. How will you track the OKRs in the teams and for the whole company? And how will you plan the initiatives, the tasks, the experiments to get you closer to the objectives? And what kind of routines are you using to track and plan and do the feedback cycles on the initiatives and experiments inside the teams? So that's an important part of it, to agree on some set of routines. And of course, part of the routines is also continuous improvement, like the teams having retrospective, like during the implementation cycle, and improving their routines while they are experimenting with the OKR routines. So some things to consider. And then start the first implementation cycle and the review. And after 3 months, review the cycle, do a big retro together to see what worked, what's improvement, and then go on. So if you think about it continuously, you always recruit some more teams after each implementation cycle. You train them, the new teams, and then you go to these reviewing the OKR cycle and the creating OKRs for the new cycle, they can be this, like, for example, like a 2-day event together. First day reviewing the cycle, second day creating the next OKRs, and then you go on for 3 months. And inside the implementation cycle, you of course track the OKRs. But this is an example of how to do it. And I think there was a question about prerequisites. The first prerequisite is the top management having some motivation to have some needs or goals that are aligned with what OKRs can provide, and there you can start the objectives creation for the OKR experiments. If you don't have any needs that are aligned with what OKRs can provide, it makes no sense. But I don't know. I would say that other than that, having time available to learn, because this kind of OKR adaptation, it's usually said that learning how to do it for an organization can take from 1 to 2 years easily. So it's not a short time span. You need to have patience. You probably need not to be thinking at the moment. But those might be the prerequisites. And when you're doing it this way, you are learning all together, at least in the 3-month cycle. And you're also learning in every team in each week or each 2 weeks. When you track the OKRs, you have the retrospectives regularly about this OKR experiment. And of course, in the executive team, if you have that, you also track the OKRs and have retrospectives during those implementation cycles. So just some tips and some things to try. So the most kind of important prerequisite for OKR adaptation is validating executive support. Do they have the motivation? Do they have the time? Because coming up with the objectives for the OKR experiment, clarifying the vision and strategy, creating the OKRs for the whole company, and also discussing with units and teams, communicating those visions, communicating the need for the OKR experiment, providing help to OKR coaches. That demands a lot of time. Training the teams that are involved, that demands a lot of motivation and time. And if the executive management is motivated, they can help motivate the teams. But if they're not motivated, if they're not involved, I think it's no use of anyone's time to try such a thing. And starting experiments with implementing OKRs as soon as possible, not just planning and sketching, starting the first implementation cycle as soon as possible. Aiming high in long term, I think this is something that was discussed in the debrief of previous exercise. Like at first, well, aim for the outcome-based objectives. Eventually, kind of be happy for the most teams to skip that, maybe for the first objectives set, and maybe not be so strict about the key results and so on. Have more variety and allow teams to learn as they go. So encouraging also experimentation and creativity in setting those goals and coming up with the routines over compliance on the framework, what the OKR book says. Because, well, it takes time to learn. and it takes time to adapt these things into different teams' contexts. For example, very technical people dealing with technical things come up naturally with different kind of objectives and key results than people working with innovation. And for me, that's okay. So it needs to be adapted to the context. But I would say that set reasonable but consistent and concrete expectations on routines during the implementation cycles. Like how often should the OKRs be tracked? How should be the feedback loops on initiatives and experiments be conducted? How many retrospectives should the team have during an OKR implementation cycle, talking about the OKRs? For me, those are quite important things to discuss and maybe set expectations. Like, for example, at Yle, in our experiment for the first cycle, we said, and it was a shorter cycle, it's a shorter cycle, 2 months, we said that we expect every pilot team to conduct 2 30-minute retrospectives, OKR retrospectives during the cycle. And I think it made it more clearer to the teams what to do and what was expected. So I would suggest that. Okay, things to try. I said that the OKRs are not rich in their kind of modeling or expression. So you might want to use something else for modeling your vision, strategy, and maybe even objectives. Alex Osterwalder's business model portfolio is one thing you might want to look into. And there are Merette's and mine Yle Agile Culture Accelerator's culture mapping based on Dave Gray's culture mapping is another thing you might want to look into. And there's, of course, lots more, like impact mapping, already discussed. And then explicit prioritization of objectives. This is from Henrik Nyberg's presentation on Spotify Rhythm, something part of Spotify experimented with after they experimented with OKRs. And it has explicit prioritization of objectives. So you might also want to look into that. And then finally, enriching objective descriptions with data behind the objective, insight, how the data is interpreted, and beliefs. What do we believe based on these insights? And what do we base our objectives behind? Because that would enable richer discussions about the objectives and more informed discussions throughout the company. But that was kind of my tips on facilitating. I've also added some slides on material to look at.